Okay, welcome. I'm glad that that you called. We've had a bit of a talk about uh, past and whatnot. Uh, so a good place to get started would be um, talking about. First off, let's use the word meditation and recognize that the word meditation is an old word that came from Christianity and got applied to the teaching of the Buddha, and that what we're actually doing is not meditation. Not if we begin to look at what meditation actually is, etc., which is more like cogitation or thinking about a particular thing, meditating on the Trinity or the grace of God or many other things like this,
Hmm.
um, designed to focus the mind down to a small group of thoughts, which has a quality then of what we're doing. But basically, better words for it would be sita bhavana, which means mental development. Or another way of thinking of it is just using the word anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, because that's in fact the basis for all of this. But the real point of all of it is to, for each individual who's practicing, is to change their attitude about their whole life. We change our view, and through then right sati to remember and right effort to actually make the change, we begin to spend more and more time in the mental state that we would prefer to be in rather than the mental states that we're in the habit of being in. And in fact, the mental states that we're in the habit of being in were the habits that were formed in childhood. And so, uh, very few children grow up with a delightful childhood that then continues into having a joyful, delightful adulthood. Very rare, but it does happen.
Hmm.
A good example of that is the Dalai Lama. He had a good bringing up, and
Hmm.
so we'll point at least in that direction. But most of us are raised by ordinary people who have the problems of ordinary people. And so we get raised then with all of the hopes, dreams, intentions, and uh, longings or quest that everybody else has. And so these longings and quest and wanting something that we don't have gave rise to many things. One of the things it gave rise to was materialism, big housing, um, having a lot of rights, rules, rituals, regulations, and social ways of doing things. It also gives rise to um, thoughts and ideas about what kind of organizations are worthy of joining and becoming a member of, like political parties or patriotism or any of that kind of stuff. So these are actually the instinctual things that are buried in our instinct: territorial instinct, nesting instinct, procreation instinct, and the self preservation instinct actually then becomes the four modes of clinging that we have. And the reason that we cling is because um, we're looking for something, and one of the ways that we can look, or one of the ways of looking at that which we're looking for, would be security. That we're all looking for security, and the world seems to be continuously unsafe. It was unsafe 600,000 years ago or so when man, or whatever it was, that ran across fire and learned to carry a stick that was burning at one end and cool at this end. That was the first attachment, I think, is grabbing a hold of that stick and carrying it off. So from those days now, things have been, and not only were they dangerous then, but we have been perceiving danger and being safe from danger ever since. That the world is a dangerous place. But our society has developed to the point that basically it's not really dangerous at all. That we live in a really safe society. And yet everybody's life is run by this sense or feeling of danger or unsettledness. They don't feel secure. They don't feel satisfied. And so that's where is the base of all of that longing. So when you begin to practice anapanasati correctly, the actual intention then is to bring yourself to that state of satisfaction and dwell there, liking what you've got. And that's actually a process. Now, in this regard, kind of an important point is that I'm not a meditation teacher. I don't teach meditation. I talk a lot about anapanasati, and when I'm not watchful of my own language, I'll use the word meditation. But basically, I'm a Dhamma teacher because the whole point of doing anything called meditation is for the wisdom that the Dhamma brings. And that the real idea that comes from the Buddha is that the Dhamma is subtle, it's profound, it's difficult for people to grasp, and in a way, it's almost like a turning around, recognizing that the giant ship of my whole life is heading off in the wrong direction. And now we got to turn this tub around. Okay, so when we begin to think of it like that, then we say, okay, basically what we're doing is that we're going to develop a set of skills that are needed to end suffering, because that's the entire teaching of the Buddha. He said in Sutta number 22, in the simile of the snake, he says, both formerly and now, I teach only one thing that the Buddha teaches. And that's really profound. Only one thing. Which means it must be really profound because it's so hard for people to grasp, but it's still just one thing. And that is dukkha nirodha. How to recognize dukkha, and then how to step out of its way and avoid it. Most meditators fall into the two groups of imagine that that the mind is like a highway, and sometimes Big Mac trucks come down that highway. And when we do, if we have choiceless awareness, we'll stand there in the road and let this Mack truck run over us. Choiceless awareness, and here it comes, okay? The other way to do it is Popeye's method, which is the method that most of the Westerners choose, and that is stand in the middle of the road, eat some spinach, put your fist out, and try to stop that Mack truck. They work too hard. They try too hard. They concentrate, and they develop, and it basically is coming out of desire. But there's a third way. The easy way out is to merely step aside and let the Mack truck pass. And so that's the way that we're going to learn to practice anapanasati, is by just letting that stuff pass. The point is, do we see it coming, or do we get run over because we're not watching? And that's where the word sati comes in. It's almost always translated as mindfulness, but I've never used the word mindfulness without talking about this. And in fact, mindfulness has a slight different connotation. That a better way of looking at sati is wake up, wakey. Start looking at what's going on. Start, or get out of the mind and into the present moment. And that the first thing that we do with that is to examine, what is the mind doing right now? What's happening, man? What's going on? This is actually step 9 of Anapanasati. So, uh, right noble sati, a factor of the Eightfold Noble Path, the first thing that we work with is also the first thing that we do with Anapanasati, and that is that wake up. We become awake to what's happening. And in Anapanasati, then we use the breath as an anchor. And that anchor then is using then the point of if I'm asleep, I'm not watching my breath, and if I'm awake, I am watching the breath. And so when the mind wanders away and we recognize the mind has wandered away, Goenka would say, never mind, start again, which means come back and watch the breath. This is the first training to wake us up, to keep waking up over and over and over again, which means to basically to wake up out of our daydreams or our night dreams or our dreaming state and come to this present moment, to wake up and be here now. And so this is the process that we get started with. That's the basics of it. But there's something that follows along with that. In fact, a good way to think about this is to understand that what we're really talking about is that we're practicing the Eightfold Noble Path as skills that need to be developed. And the way that we're going to develop them is through the practice of Anapanasati. And that Anapanasati then at many points will be pointing out skills that need to be developed. Well, one of the skills that needs to be developed is sukha. Sukha is actually the opposite of dukkha, and it means to actually develop the feeling of being satisfied with this present moment. This is actually a deep part of the practice that most people miss. But the way that we develop that sukha, that feeling of deep satisfaction, actually, any old satisfaction will do to start with. But as we enjoy it more and more, it seems to deepen, deepening more and more because it's actually a skill to be developed. But we start it by being satisfied. For instance, if your intention was to learn to play the piano, you bought the sheet music, you had a teacher, you've got the piano sitting there in the room, but you spend all your time playing a violin. Or you spend all of your time reading a math book, falling over a chessboard. Is any of that going to help you with the intention of playing the piano? How about actually playing the piano? Will that take one into the development of the skill of playing piano? Okay. If we look at it from that direction, that means here's the basis then of the satisfaction is right from the very beginning. That we don't practice meditation to get satisfaction. We practice satisfaction and call that meditation. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
Okay, all right. If we look at it from that way, now let's look at an intermediate step or two that I haven't really mentioned yet. And that is step 10 of Anapanasati. By the way, satisfaction is at step 6 of Anapanasati. So when we talk about it as steps, in that regard of Anapanasati, this is not a march up 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or whatever like that. This is more like a tango, to where we're all over the map. And the way that I teach is more of a natural method rather than a step-by-step method. And the Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is the one who, it's kind of funny because even though he teaches Anapanasati in the organized method, he talks about the natural method, and when he's talking to students individually, we talk it always in the natural way. But when the books are published, it's taught in the organized way because that's the way that it's set out in the sutras, and that's the way that it's followed, which is breathing first, and then feeling, and then mind objects. But here we are starting at step 9. Then we're going to do step 10, and then we're going to do step 6, while also doing step 1 and 2. In fact, number 1 and 2, that's the main pump. That's the anapana that we're doing sati on, the breathing, which many students miss. The breathing has to be really good breathing as opposed to ordinary breathing. So learning to take deep breaths, that's what the whole point is, learning how to take a deep breath so that you keep you don't keep, but you're there at least enough often so that you know that this is a deep breath and you know that it's an in breath. And then you know it's a deep breath as it's a deep out breath. And so it's a deep sigh. Is kind of the out breath, letting it all out. So this breathing is a really important key. But then so is step 10, a major, major key. And that key then is what the Buddha was doing for himself when he was under the bo tree, figuring out how the mind worked and putting together this path. He came at one point to saying to himself, when he would see what was going on, he would say, "Aha, I see you, Mara." Have you ever heard of that phrase before? I see you, Mara.
I've heard it.
Okay, you've heard it. Okay, so
But
that's
I
going to
don't.
you're going to start saying that then to yourself a lot, in the sense of, I see what the mind is doing. I see that the mind is in hindrance. I see the mind is not watching the breath. I see that I'm about to get angry. And so now we're beginning to apply it all over the place. But that whole point of, I see you, Mara, is
Mhm.
actually a major, major factor of anapanasati. It's step 10. And it is listed as gladdening the mind. Because once the sati is awake, the natural thing to do is to feel bad, because we want the mind to watch the breath. I mean, watching the breath. Oh, me, what a monkey mind. This meditation stuff is hard work. I don't know if I can do it or not. And you know the whole routine. I can see by your face you've done that before. Okay, that's one's wrong effort. That's getting run over by that Mack truck.
Mhm.
Okay, we have to change our attitude right away. And the way that we change the attitude is by gladdening the mind in the sense of, I see you, Mara. I see that the mind has wandered away. Because, in fact, the mind wanders away all the time. The whole point is that it's a wandering mind. The question is it going to wander wholesomely or wander unwholesomely? The answer to that is, well, we haven't been watching. We haven't been noting. We haven't really cared before to start paying attention to where the mind wanders, or the fact that it's even wandering at all. Because if
Mhm.
we recognize it, well, probably the right way for it to wander is to wander around the here now, rather than wandering around the past, wandering around the future, wanting something we don't have, or in fact any of the hindrances. And that wandering is, in the Pali, is normally translated as restlessness, a restless mind, but it is bound to wander, and it will continue to wander. The question is, do you have any control over where it wanders? The answer is, well, not yet, but we're going to get some.
Okay.
And so this is how we begin it, is with tethering it to the breath. Now, just as a short interlude, let's talk about how to train horses. There is, I need to look it up because I talk about it sometimes, but there is a very, very famous horse academy that produces show horses in Europe. And the way that they treat the horses there is the young colt that they put in training, they put him in a huge barn so that he's got lots and lots of room to go around. And then um, the trainer comes out with an apple and tries to give it to the horse. This is part of the training is that you give the horse a gift.
Mm-hmm.
After you get to the point that you can pet the horse and touch the horse, and the horse is feeling secure and supply and satisfied with an apple or two, and this takes a day or so, then the next time the trainer comes out, he comes out wearing a saddle on his shoulder. And he pets that saddle and he looks at that saddle. That's a really nice saddle. And then he shows the saddle to the horse. And he says, "Hey, you want this? You want a saddle?" And so this is how they do it. And when the horse is willing to accept it, that's when the horse can actually turn around and watch what he's doing as he puts the saddle on the horse. And then
Mm-hmm.
they leave the saddle on the horse. Eventually, they'll get it hinched. And the next thing, or the last basically part, is to at least get enough harness on him so he can get training. Then the next thing they do is they put a child, one who's already been part of their organization and training. They don't put a wild kid on a wild horse, but they put a little kid or maybe a girl so
Mm-hmm.
that the horse doesn't have much weight. And then with the bridle, not in the hands of the rider, but in the hands of the trainer, they begin to walk. And so this is the whole procedure that they go around. Okay, how do they train horses in the United States? They put the horse in a fairly small corral, confines him in, puts him in a state of fear. The cowboy comes jumping out, throws a great big heavy saddle on it, climbs on that horse, and that horse is completely freaked out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? What kind of meditator are you going to be? A Western cowboy meditator? Or the genteel, um, more, let us say, Eastern European way of training. Those who've been training horses in this academy for centuries. They've developed a technique of how to train horses. But in the
Mm-hmm.
cowboys, they take about as long, but the horse never really settles down or gives in. The Western horses are always just a little bit afraid of their riders. They're skittish. They can't handle uh, gunfire and all of that kind of stuff. But this is the way of looking at it is that how are we going to train the mind? Are we going to train it by jumping on it and trying to force the mind, or are we going to be very gentle? And
Mm-hmm.
so sati is actually a gentle way of waking up. And so that call that the Buddha makes, aha, I see you, Mara, is actually a loving call that um, it has joy and gladness built into it. Aha, I see you. Not the cowboy way of, I see you, which is not what we're looking for. We're looking for a very gentle way of bringing the mind back to a state by throwing out the hindrances, letting the wildness go. So we begin to control it. So this is the very beginning of the practice of anapanasati, is the waking up and then gladdening the mind. And so then you can talk about gladdening the mind is also a part of right effort. Wrong effort would be trying to make it do something or being exasperated because it won't do something,
Mm-hmm.
but rather gently coaxing it to train it. We know that the mind is out of control. We already know that. So let's be gentle in training it because if we kick it around, it's going to be even harder to get it under control. We've got to make friends with our own mind, literally, become friends with ourselves. And so
Mm-hmm.
this is the gladdening part. That gladdening then, as the feelings seep down in, will become then satisfying and satisfactory. But also, that right effort requires us to get good breathing going. The brain needs the oxygen, especially the frontal cortex, the actual mammal part, or not the mammal, but the human part of the brain takes the most oxygen and nutriments out of the blood. And so, if we're not breathing properly, the first thing that the brain shuts down is the frontal cortex. Our most valuable wisdom is what goes out first. An
Mhm.
example of that is that in a debate, get your opponent angry, and you'll win the debate. Or even in a boxing match, if you get your opponent angry, you can beat the tar out of it. He's got to keep his wits about it. Okay, this is what we're talking about is that if we don't keep our wits about us, then our own hindrances are going to beat the tar out of
Mhm.
us. But if we got our wits about us through deep breathing and doing the exercise of being ready for the game, then that means we're the boss now. We're the champion. We've got the effort going. We've got the breathing going. We have got the gladdening of the mind going. And in that combination now comes the fourth item, and that is attitude. The first being right view. Right view gains right attitude through right effort and right sati. Right sati over and over and over again, right effort over and over and over again begins to develop right attitude, which is an attitude of a winner, a can do attitude. I can come out of my own crap. I can do it one more time. I've done it often enough that I know that I can come out of it. All I have to do is remember.
Mm.
If I can remember to come out of it, that's all it takes. I've got the effort. I know how to put the effort in to come out of it. So this is basically the practice of Anapanasati. It has these four qualities from the Eightfold Noble Path. So let's look at the others for just a moment. Most of this work that we're talking about is done when a student is in seclusion. First thing we do is we get secluded from the world, and then we learn to become secluded from our mind. This is the whole point of the retreat, or one of the points of the retreat, is for the students to get secluded. Unfortunately, in a retreat that's got a lot of students in it, they're really not in seclusion. They're in a crowd, and many of
Mhm.
them are in that crowd operating with herd mentality, doing what they're supposed to do, rather than actually feeling secluded. But if you feel really secluded and using the meditation retreat as an opportunity to go in seclusion, but right now during the coronavirus 19, people have a marvelous opportunity to go into seclusion and enjoy the heck out of their stay. But most people are in fact flipped out. They don't
Mhm.
want it. Where in fact, what a marvelous opportunity folks have to just do nothing, and marvelously so, because
Yeah.
you're satisfied with doing nothing, satisfied with just sitting here. So, from that perspective, the practice of anapanasati is getting ourselves into seclusion. But one of the outcomes of seclusion is that while we're sitting in seclusion, whether it's in our home in coronavirus land or whether we're sitting in a meditation retreat center in seclusion, we're not harming anyone. We're not even speaking. So if we have no speech, how can we have wrong speech? If we have no behavior, if we're practicing not doing anything but just sitting, then our behavior is excellent. So just doing the retreat for a little while, your sila is absolutely spot on perfect. So we add that as an automatic. Later, what we do is we learn to incorporate that, but in a completely new way. But the last point of the Eightfold Noble Path is what is called area samadhi. But in this case, samadhi does not mean um, concentration. This is one of the places where most Westerners get confused because samadhi is not well translated as concentration.
Mhm.
Think of it as in the sense of a teepee. You know what a teepee looks like? American Indian teepee, right?
Mhm.
One of the qualities of all teepees is that there's a gathering point at the top where the flap opens for the smoke to get out. But the characteristic is this is where all the ridge folds meet.
Mhm.
This is the apex. Some of them may point out after that, but they all come and are bound together in one place. so that when the TP is actually tipped over, so that it can be carried, they don't unbind that group of poles at the top. That apex is samadhi. That's the samadhi point, the gathering together of the factors.
Okay.
Okay, so what are the gathering together? The gathering together is right view, right sati, right effort, and right attitude. Those things together, in fact, those three build right attitude, and with right attitude, that gives us something that we will call now, and the Buddha used the word uh, a unified mind, that the mind becomes unified. This is where all of the factors come together. And there are many qualities of a unified mind that are easy to understand. One of them is that if we lie, then that's separating. That's one pole of truth, and the other pole is the lie. But when
Mm-hmm.
we are unified in our mind, we don't lie. We tell the truth. Sometimes, even when it's dangerous to tell the truth, we still tell the truth. We don't lie. We're not trying to protect a self that really doesn't exist anyway. Another quality of it is doubt. When the mind is unified, it's free from doubt. Doubt will tear us apart. Is it this? Is it that? Do I do it this way or do we do it that way, etc., like that? But once we have wisdom, once we see what is the right way, then all doubt is eradicated, and that helps create this quality of unified mind. Now, we'll talk a lot more about this later. But the point about this unified mind now is that now the mind is fit. Now the mind is unified, it's noble, it's high quality, it's very, very high class. And because of that, and in fact, along with that, is that the mind is in a state where it doesn't want anything. It's satisfied with the way things are. If we are now satisfied with the way things are, then we're not likely to jump into the truck and drive to the store to do some shoplifting, right? We're not
Mm-hmm.
going to be shoplifting because we got what we want. If we want something that we don't have and we can't afford it, then we actually recognize, oh, well, the problem is that not that I can't afford it and I need to steal it, but rather that look at what I want. Why do I want this? Why am I willing to harm other people in order for me to feel good when I could feel good without it? And so, in that regard, our morality then becomes automatically, as part of the unified mind, part of the landscape. It no longer is part of the effort, it's part of the outcome. And so, in that regard, is only that the Eightfold Noble Path is started off in the form of, or is set out in the form of right view, right uh, attitude, and then goes to sila, right speech, right action, and right livelihood, ending up with then the samadhi part of mindfulness uh, or sati, right effort, and then finally samadhi. This is the way that it's set out for beginners, merely to keep the groups together. But in fact, the right way of looking at it is right, and the way that I'm talking about is actually set out in one of the sutras, number 117, which is the Great 40. And in that regard, it's that right view comes first. If we don't have the right view about things, we're not going to be able to accomplish anything. We basically got to get that ship turned around so that we at least know that we're heading in the right direction. And so that's one's right view. But in fact, things are quite complicated. We'll begin to see that we were going in the wrong direction on some things and in the right direction on others. So it begins to be a learning process of figuring out things more and more as to what's the right way to go. And the right way to go then is based upon a viewpoint. An example of that, in fact, would be that if you were a sniper and your target, or maybe you're just a camera bug, but you're on the other side of the building where your target is, then
Mm-hmm.
you're either going to miss your shot or you're going to have to change your location. You're going to have to change your viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, what we're talking about is one's right view is the ability to change our viewpoint. And that the more flexible our viewpoint gets, then the wider a variety of things that we're capable of seeing because we're beginning to look at things in a completely new way. And
Okay.
so as our view increases, so does then um, our entire practice. And along with that, we now look at sati as the number one item that is intended to be developed. That our job becomes sati because we've already got just enough right view to get sati going. So now that we've got just enough right view, an example of that right view is better to be in the meditation retreat than it is taking 2 weeks off. Which is that thought crossed your mind, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And which one did you choose? You chose to go to the retreat. That was right view. Okay. And then you're sitting in the meditation hall, and now all of a sudden you recognize that the mind has wandered away from the breath. What is right view now? Never mind, start again. Let's come back and we watch the breath. But a
Mm-hmm.
wrong view would be, oh no, this is so terrible. Oh, I'm so bad at meditation. I don't know why I came to this retreat. Which is generally a thought that comes by everybody's mind during that 10-day retreat. Sometimes that thought takes over. So one's right view is, oh no, I'm coming here to practice anapanasati. Let's do it right now. And so that's all the right view that we need. The main point, though, is sati. Keep doing that over and over. Wake up, wake up, wake up. Recognize that your mind has wandered away from the breath. Or recognize it eventually as we're getting good at it, that even though the breath is there and we're watching it, still there's all of this garbage going on kind of on its own off to the side, or in fact, another way of talking about it is background noise.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps you've had that experience. Yes, I'm watching my breath, but that didn't stop the thought machine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But we're beginning to take over because now we're recognizing that even though that I can watch the breath, the thought machine still has quality. So what we begin to do then is to say, okay, if you're Mr. Thought Machine going to be in operation, I've got a new job for you. And that is now you're going to start having thoughts that I tell you to have and not have thoughts that you used to have all on your own. And so we begin now to manage the thoughts.
Okay.
And the management of the thoughts is beginning to pay attention to what's happening right now. Let's start having thoughts about watching the breath. Let's start having thoughts about the deliciousness of the air as it comes in the lungs. Let's have thoughts about feeling the sides of the body as the breathing swells. Let's have thoughts about how good it is that we're not having random thoughts, that we're guiding the thoughts. Okay. So this is the way of getting started. And also the kind of thought that we can have is, I can do this. We also start with the thought of, aha, I see you, Mara. Aha, I see you. That's step 10. That's the gladdening the mind. That's pulling the mind out of the crap.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing is to wake up to the fact that you're in the crap. Then you pull the mind out of the crap with the thought, I see you, Mara. And now we're good to go to start again. We need to practice that little duet over and over and over again, thousands and thousands of times until we get quite good at it. And that's what that's why we use the word practice. We have to practice and practice and practice. But all the time, every time, the immediate outcome is delicious. The immediate outcome every time is, wow, this is better right now than it was a second ago. We become more and more satisfied with our practice. And as we do it more and more, we also become more um, confident that we can continue to do it. So when people get sick, they'll lose confidence, they'll lose the right view, and they'll also they will lose that confidence that they've built up to tell themselves that you can do this, you can continue to do this. Never mind, start again. When do
Mm-hmm.
you start again? Whenever you think of it. No pressure here, just a lot of suffering when you don't, or at least a lot of dukkha.
Mm-hmm.
That basically that's a really misuse of the term dukkha by calling it suffering. That this is not suffering. In fact, if you walk down the street saying, "Oh, I've got Buddhism here, anybody suffering?" Nobody will say I'm suffering. But if you talk about dissatisfaction, everybody will admit to dissatisfaction. If that's really what we're talking about with dukkha. So how can we get ourselves out of a state of dissatisfaction, longing and looking and on a quest and wanting something out of meditation, into actually directly getting ourselves into a state of satisfaction and knowing that we can do it and building that confidence because we keep practicing it over and over again. This is the Eightfold Noble Path and the practice of Anapanasati working together.
Okay.
So you're saying that you're about to go on to a self-imposed retreat with Aman. When are you planning on doing that, and where are you located? What city?
Um, I'm in I guess near cool in Idaho, like in the
Oh, wow.
countryside. So,
That's a
there's
good place for seclusion.
yeah, um, yeah. So I've got another week here. I'm on a coronavirus isolation um, period.
How
Um,
optimistic. 1 week
well, until um, got
until they
another week
figure out
that,
that
that's
1 week was not enough.
I mean, I have another week until my isolation for the reason of potential coronavirus exposure is over. Um, but in terms of like the social distancing stuff and all that, like I mean, I expect that to continue going on for some time.
Okay.
Um,
So
yeah.
use your isolation well. All we need to do is change it out of the word isolation into the word seclusion.
Okay.
Almost like seclusion is inviting and isolation is somewhat off-putting.
Mm-hmm.
So think of it as seclusion so that you can practice now that you're secluded and each one is secluded from each other in the society that we create together. And now we can deal with uh, allowing the mind to be secluded from that world on the inside. Is now that we've dealt with it on the outside by being in seclusion. Thank you, coronavirus. Into now, let's be secluded from that world on the inside of the mind also.
Okay.
And so that would be one's right view is let's spend our time being secluded from the world and spend our time in ways that are wholesome, valuable, etc. And so spending our time that way means now we need sati to remember to be in that state. And
Mm-hmm.
now let's take the effort that it takes to come out of the world that we had just created and come into the reality of the moment there where you are. Reality of the room, the reality of your body, the reality of the air that you're breathing in, etc., like that, and come into a real place out of the magical world of the mind. And oh, what a relief that is. Oh, what a relief it is to come out of that world that world of wanting something, into the
Mhm.
world of being satisfied with this present moment. And so sati is what we need to practice that over and over and over and over again. Will eventually the dogs of the mind stop barking. They won't stop barking forever, but at least they'll settle down for a while so that when they do bark, you know it.
Okay.
So, is this much different from what you've been practicing before?
Um, I mean, some of it I've strung together pieces of it, but I think that's the clearest connecting of all of the parts. Most of the stuff that I've stumbled across or been taught is just one part of the thing rather than a more systemic look, I guess.
Okay.
Um,
Well, first off, I haven't done all of it. You ain't seen nothing yet.
okay.
But
Um, so
we'll
yeah.
examine a whole bunch of nothing later, right? So there's other things to do even first, but we've got the basic parts. The
Hmm.
basic parts of Anapanasati would be basically step one, a bit of step three. Um, then we work with step 9 and 10, then step 5 and 6, leading us back to step 3 and 4. All the while, we eventually put together step 13 to 16 so that we finally come to relinquishment of it all, or all the letting go. So it's actually kind of uh, chamber music would be the word. Or maybe this is like the Beatles
Okay.
with everybody, but he's got probably 15 or 16 instruments in this small cluster of musicians, and they've got a song to play together.
Okay.
And that song is your life.
Yeah.
The question is it going to be beautiful music, or is it going to be a bunch of wrong notes out of out of tune, and maybe a fight or two between the musicians?
Yeah.
And so learning to get the mind together to play the same tune, that's what we mean then by the unification of mind, is we
Hmm.
bring it all together. And the way that we do that is by practicing sati over and over again to get the mind to settle down. So that's like the theme song.
Hmm.
It's like, let me give you an example. In a symphony, the musician who or the composer will have a short theme that happens over and over and over and over and over again. For instance, in the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, it's da 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 da. That's both the whole symphony itself, as well as that's not it at all. That's just the motif or the theme song. So that's the way that we look at Anapanasati is that we have a few keynotes that we play, but basically it's a 16-piece orchestra, and that they're going to play some nice music together if
Hmm.
we can get them to behave themselves and join in to the song we're singing.
Okay.
Okay, so that's a way of thinking about it. So in the beginning, we need to get down that theme song, that da 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 da, which is wakey wakey, the mind, come
Hmm.
into knowing that the mind has wandered away. I see you, Mr. Wandering Away Mind. Adding that symbol clash, I guess, is the way of talking about that. Is wake up, okay, with that symbol clash, and then the timpani's going like that. I see you, Mister Mara, and then with that right effort, getting the breathing going, or maybe the breathing is the tom toms. Who knows? I'm just making this up on the fly. But in any case, we're getting these basic parts together of getting the breathing, getting the mind clean from the hindrances, getting the mind gladdened up. And with that, we're beginning to get the factors together to get the mind fit for work. This is basically the wake-up call, or the theme song. Is let's get this mind oxygenated, liberated, and fit for work. And
Okay.
when we get it fit for work, then it's going to be fit for examining the Dhamma. In that regard, this is where meditation and the Dhamma fit together. Is we're actually practicing the Dhamma to get the mind fit for work. But getting it fit for work is what is called the practice, or the mental development, so that we develop the mind to the point that it's sharp enough to actually understand the Dhamma. I've had students call me and say, I've been practicing meditation all this time, but something is missing. Something is missing. And I say, yeah, it's the Dhamma. That's what's missing.
Mm-hmm.
The whole point of your meditation is to understand dukkha and dukkha nirodha.
Mm-hmm.
But how we come to understand that is by practicing it over and over and over again, of seeing the Mara, seeing the dukkha, and throwing it out of the mind and come back and be satisfied. So the practice of the path becomes the path itself.
Okay.
And when we get really skilled at it, that's when we're developing the factors of enlightenment. When your sati becomes unremitting, when your investigation becomes unremitting, when your right effort becomes unremitting, in the sense that it's no longer an effort now, it's energetic. We're really eager to practice this stuff. When we get to that point, then these things are not just factors of the path, but whether now they're the factors of the end of the path, or this is the completion. The completion is the 7 factors of enlightenment, or the Sambojana. So this is the reason for practicing Anapanasati, or practicing the Eightfold Path, is for the fulfillment of the path, which are the factors of the Eightfold Noble Path after they're fully developed. And when they're fully developed, now we've got the factors of enlightenment. So there again, we're becoming the factors gathering together. That's the samadhi mind. That's when the mind becomes unified. So one of the factors of the Sambojana is the unification of mind.
Mm-hmm.
Unremitting unification of mind. We keep coming back to it over and over again, because we've got these foundations of sati and right view, right effort, and right attitude over and over and over again. It's actually not that hard a practice to do.
Okay.
Now, here's something that I'll add to that, and that is, this is more or less the complete path, and that many, many other meditation systems, they kind of start off, sometimes even intentionally start off the student on not enough of the notes to get a full bar, or a full theme. Like da 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 da, that takes 3 or 2 notes, okay? And so they give them the da da da, but they don't get them the da. That's one way of looking at it. Another way that I would talk about it is that it's like baking a cake. Now, a cake has a few ingredients to it. It's generally got milk and eggs and flour and butter and sugar. But it doesn't have to have that. In fact, most modern things, they don't use milk anymore. They'll put water in, and then they'll use oil as a substitute. But never mind, we still have enough of it left. But what happens with meditation is like happening with a cake, is when you actually leave ingredients out. And in general, there are 2 major ingredients left out of most practices of Anapanasati. The 2 major ingredients that are left out is the gladdening of the mind, which we can think of then as the sugar. And then we can also say that another ingredient that's often left out is the deep breathing quality of really getting the body oxygenated and get the mind really fit for work. That's often not emphasized enough.
Mm-hmm.
So then the meditation winds up being cake without any flour and out any sugar. It winds up being more like a solution for French toast than it does a cake. And so this is a way of thinking about it. And we can also understand that that can be applied worldwide to all of the religions. The problem is that they have not all of the actual needed ingredients to do the job. And but what they'll do is they'll substitute something like magic. Magic is the ingredient that's offered when you don't have all of the right ingredients. We'll make it up.
Okay.
And so what we're practicing here is real enough that gives real results that are worthwhile and valuable, that we don't have to add any magic. That if there is any magic, we manufacture it because we know that we're manufacturing it, and then we put it to good use. So if there is any magic in there, we know it's magical. We're not being confused by it. An example of that is my current joke of the poetic justice department of the giant comma machine in the sky has sent coronavirus 19 to give the earth a chance to take a breath by taking the breath away from the humans. Isn't that poetic justice? And so that's a way of looking at magic, is so that we can see the connections. I mean, there is a connection there, but all we have is a magical view of it. We cannot understand exactly what's going on, but we do know that this is a marvelously good time for Mother Earth. The air in the cities is getting cleaned up, but you're in Idaho, so your air was already good enough. Like the air on this island here, we don't have to worry about it. But friends in London and friends in New York saying the sky is getting clear for first time. Matt said it's never been this clear before, and I said not in your lifetime, but it's been this clear before.
Mm-hmm.
And so the skies are getting cleaned up, and the soot and the exhaust of the cars is settling down. And this is a marvelous time for the human being. If the human beings would only settle down the way their own atmosphere is settling down, this would be a much nicer planet. That in fact the problem is the economics. They think that the economics is the important thing, but no, quality of life is the important thing. And right now you have a major, major advantage for having at least a few weeks of high quality of life. Please, I invite you, enjoy. Write a symphony of something.
Mm-hmm.
But work on that theme song.
Yeah.
Aha, I see you, Myra. That's the first note of the song, or the second note. The first note of the song is a cymbal crash. Wakey, wakey, you know. Ah, I see you, Myra. And that's how the song starts. So, in that regard, good luck. I hope you will. I wish you well. Take this time to practice. And this can be done whether you're sitting down or not.
Mm-hmm.
This can be done anytime during the day. That in fact, the time to do it, the time that's most important to do it is when you need it the most.
Okay.
When is that? Well, um, it's like Murphy's Law. You've heard of Murphy's Law, right?
Mm-hmm.
Murphy's Law states anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and it'll go wrong at the worst possible moment. Well, that's when you need sati, is at the worst possible moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so practice well, because those worst possible moments will come. And if you're ready for it, you'll handle the situation marvelously. nobly.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the reason we're practicing. We're practicing over and over and over again to get such a habit developed that when we need it most, it will be there for us.
Mm-hmm.
So that we don't sing a sad song, we sing a happy song instead.
Right.
All right. Well, when are you going to call again?
What I mean, I'm here. What works for you?
Um, a good one would be once every couple of days. We
Okay.
can make good progress in a few days if you call every couple of days.
Okay. Um,
Start to fill in some of those notes.
sure. Is there and should we set a time or do you just
No, I
okay?
don't. I don't make appointments.
Sounds good.
But if you call, I'll probably be around.
Okay.
And if I'm around, I'll probably answer.
Okay. That sounds good. Well, thank you.
All right. Well, we'll see you later.
Sounds good.